So hey, I'm Chris with Cycle Source Magazine.
I'm Heather with Cycle Source Magazine, and we're hanging out at Dennis Kirk today.
When people picture in their head what Easy Riders was in the early days, it wasn't actually that way. And I know this only because I know people that were there now and I've known them for a long time, but you get this picture of like a whole table full of these crazy grizzled bikers with bottles and knives in the table, and that's not what Easy Riders was like.
Sure.
That is what Cycle Source was like. We used to have a general rule in our magazine meetings that you had to have
Long before
the whiskey
me.
bottle to be able to talk at the meeting. You know, so it was literally like I was bouncing in a strip club. I had a little aftermarket shop in the daytime. We literally started the magazine with disposable throwaway cameras. I don't even know how many people that are watching this will even remember those. The little throwaway cameras that when you were done with them, you took them and turned them into Photo Hut. And there's not even Photo Hut anymore. So
And a borrowed computer. They borrowed a computer.
We borrowed a computer from a stripper and then realized none of us knew how to use a computer. So we sold all the ads for the first issue. There I sat with my, $3,000 or $4,000 worth of money ready to go to the printer, and we sat down and tried to make our first ad. And I think at the time it was like Corel Draw, and it was before PageMaker even. There was another page layout suite. I can't remember what it was, but it was horrible. It was horrific. So we put off the first issue, which would have been the
March.
February of 1997 would have been the first issue. We put it off for a whole month, and I knew some guys in Pittsburgh that were running a magazine called The Go-Go, and it was a local free publication for the strip clubs all over Pittsburgh, and they taught us PageMaker and Photoshop, and I think it was, God, I'm going to talk about how old I am, but it was like, Adobe Photoshop 4 or something. You know what I mean? So.
And it was literally on newsprint. Like, you had black or white. There was no, like...
Yeah, there was no grayscale because we didn't understand dot game. Like all the things that over the years we would learn, separations for color and all the printer stuff that goes with it. Well, when you do a newspaper magazine, you set it up for dot gain, and there's, a gradient scale that you use and all this stuff. Well, none of that for us. So our first magazine was black or white. I had a bald-headed
It did have a
friend.
color
It had color cover. But I had a bald-headed friend who did our tech article that month, and people asked me how I got powder to write my tech article, because it just looked like this big white head with two eyeballs. But, I mean, that's a testament to motorcycle people and how, like I say, today I work so hard because motorcycles saved my life and I wanted to be here for other people. No education. I had zero money, zero skills, but people believed in the passion that I had for this, that I loved these people in this community so much, and they'd let me do it again and again, and since then up to today, 299 times,
For the first number of years, it was free on newsprint just in the Pittsburgh and surrounding areas, and then it grew a little bit and grew a little bit, and he would, like, after he got it back from the printer, he would bundle them up and load them into his little, like, floorless VW Bug.
Yeah, 1972 Volkswagen Bug.
And he would hand deliver them to, like, all the little
A
bars
crescent
and
wrench, a fan belt, and maybe 500 bundles of magazines at one time. So I remember the back of that car, like old Volkswagen Bugs, when you press the suspension too much, the tires splay out.
Yep.
So I'd be going down the road with tires out like this, and if it was the middle of the winter, you hit a
like a
bump,
cartoon
and
character.
from the hole in the floor, the entire inside of the car would be just like a giant spray of cold water, and you'd sit there like.
And then he grew this network, and people he was like the Pied Piper. Like, these people would just be like, let me help. And, he'd drop magazines off here, and then they would get them a little bit further, and here, and they would get them a little bit further.
And dude, I prayed for the day that I was like, man, can you imagine what it would be like if
And he never charged a
we
penny.
just shipped the magazines out, because everything it was completely, dude, to save the money for like the layout, when you send something into a printer, and this was back then. Now we have what they call direct-to-plate technology, where you hit print, It literally prints out on a plate that goes onto the machine. Well, back then was still in the days of film. So you would sit at a big table like this that was, you know, a light table, and you would lay out your whole magazine on layout boards, and they'd be, you know, four-page layout boards, and they'd all have to be turned in a certain direction so that went through bindery, it would be in the right order. You'd have to sit there and run each printed out copy through a wax machine. You'd place it on the right orientation, lined up with the printer's marks, and then if there was any colors to it, you would put a Lexan sheet over it, and you would set, you know, if it was CMYK, if you had a 4-color piece, it was 4 sheets that all had to line up together, and from there it would go into a giant camera that would shoot a piece of film of that 4-page layout sheet. You know, so to save the money of having the printer do that, because we were still, you know, low budget as you can even imagine, I would go into Pittsburgh with you know, all the pages for my magazine. I'd sit at the printer and they'd let me go in. And it's a multi-million-dollar print company, and somehow the guy's like, yeah, man, you can just come in and use our layout room, and he would let me sit there and paste up my own stuff.
He'd even label, like when you did subscription, he'd actually sit there and do his own address labels at the post office. He did it all.
Yeah, until we got to 100 subscribers, we actually sat there and filled each one out. And then we learned, like, there was label programs where you could just print stuff, man.
Well, because there's a question I wanted to ask Heather, but then on that point, as we're growing, what was it like then to hit that national point? How many years did it take to get to that? What was it like to basically offload all of that work but that work off to the printer? Like, how tremendous was that moment?
It was incredible, and then immediately
deflating.
Yeah, because I didn't have the benefit of a secondary education.
Sure.
And I had no example from anyone for what I was doing. Like, I would see other people in the print industry and I would be like, how do I get from here to there? And everyone, you know, nobody can tell you how to do from completely local and free to the national newsstand. It never happens. Like, it's seriously not to my credit, but no one in their right mind would ever try to do that. And I didn't realize that. So I had sent, around the 8-year mark, I started sending all these samples out to distribution firms.
And back then there were a lot of distribution firms.
Like dozens of people that represented national magazines on the newsstand, and I was sending all these letters out, and I kept getting rejection letters. You know, no, come back when you grow a little bit more. Well, at the time we had a glossy cover, glossy center spread.
And you were in 9 states, right?
9 states, but we were still super regional, you know, when I think about it today. And the rest of it was still black and white, and it was still, you know, all the advertising was super regional. And one firm out of Canada sent me a letter back and said, hey, we're going to pick you up. So the first month they took us everything east of the Mississippi. Within the first 6 months, they filled in the rest of the country. But when I first got that letter, was the happiest day of my life. I called my buddy over who had been with me since way early on with the magazine. Before I got the letter out, I poured him a glass of whiskey. I had a glass of whiskey, and I turned ZZ Top's I'm Bad, I'm Nationwide up on the radio, and we danced around the house like fools after I told him what was going on. And we had a great 2 minutes. And almost as soon as that song was over, in reality, like 30 days after my magazine went out to the national newsstand at first. Now, remember, at this time we were still on newsprint. To go to the national newsstand, they wanted it all glossy. They wanted more color pages. At the time, I think I was charging $1.65 for the magazine.
Which was a process for him. Like, even to charge any money, he had to psych himself up for a year before he would charge money for it.
Entire year, I had stickers made, cling stickers for the windows of all the shops, because back then, like 740 places carried free Cycle Source magazines for 8 years, almost an entire decade. I had window clings made, and it was $1.25. Mm-hmm. And it said Cycle Source on sale here, $1.25. And I put one of those on my bathroom mirror every day. Every day I would get up and tell myself that I was gonna do this, I was gonna do this, and it took a year to even do that. But we spent all this money getting everything together, and you know, I was still, so 97 when the magazine started, 8 years later, I was still pretty young, and as far as business went or anything, I was totally naive. So I didn't read the contract or anything. I just signed it because now I made it. I'm going to be on the national newsstands. That's all I really cared about. Well, a month after I'd spent a huge amount of money and got to the national newsstand, got my magazine delivered, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, this is great. And I'm like, so
Where's
when
my
does
check?
that check come in? And I called the distributor up. I'm like, hey, so it's been like a month. I said, when do you guys send me the check for all the magazines that we sent? And she like broke down in hysterical laughter. She said, are you kidding me? She said, didn't you read any of the paperwork that we sent you? And I was like, no. And that's when she explained the process, that when you publish a national magazine, you pay to have it printed, you pay to have it shipped to a national distribution hub, it's broken up there, you pay to have it shipped into regional distribution hubs, into local distribution hubs, and you pay to have it put in the store. It sits on the rack for 30 days and then goes 2 steps back. They count it, verify it, and shred it. And 120 days from that point, they give you a check on what you've sold.
5 months. So 5 months after you've already paid to print your magazine, you get your first check.
So not only was I getting the news that there was no check in my immediate future, it was time for another issue of the magazine. So, and 4 more right after that I was gonna have to come up with before I ever saw
A penny.
$1 from the newsstand. And I wanted to die. I wanted to die. I borrowed money from people. I sold things. I did, like, I still to this day can't figure out how we got into that. I went from being a, somewhat successful and solvent to I was at least $10,000 a month upside down for the next 2 years. I mortgaged everything I ever had or ever would have, and I have young guys ask me today, like, hey, where do you find the inspiration? Like, where do you come up with that? How do you always, keep your head in the game? And I'm like, really, when you finally believe in what you're doing enough to bet everything you'll ever have on it, you'll find the inspiration. In the middle of the night when you can't sleep because you're terrified, it'll come to you.